Hello, everyone. Welcome into the North Georgia Sports Report podcast. Will Cooper and Art Mosley bringing it to you here on a Wednesday evening. This is November the 1st. We took our day off for Halloween to let the kids come around, get some treats, maybe some tricks. What'd you do on Halloween, Art?
Man, you know, Coop, I'm one of those hey kids stay off my lawn kind of people. But
are you?
No, I'm not. Are you kidding me? You know, I have some friends that think that you're just a grumpy old man. I'm just that's not the case. Had a bonfire out in front, a little fire pit, handed out candy with some neighbors. I will tell you, Coop, for me, if Halloween is for the kids, right? Of young and old. I'm not a big dress up guy, but if you're gonna come by the Mosley household, you better come correct. Like if you do not have a costume, you get called out.
Okay.
And my wife always says you're gonna get our house papered. I was like, really? Really?
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet. So, we had mostly good sports. The only kid I had to turn away was actually a friend of one of my sons, and he knew the rules, and he didn't get any candy. He did come back with the costume, so It was a good night. I didn't have to be, the get off my lawn kid.
A
hard-nosed guy, right?
Yeah, that's good.
So anyway, there's Halloween, and that means we've turned to the month of November.
We have.
And we are almost to the second season of playoffs. But before we talk about playoffs, we've got one more regular season week. Coop, before we get started, I do want to say I've already gotten a complaint earlier today. Hey, where's the podcast? Didn't drop yet. And I was like, hey, whoa. Look, if you're looking for an angle, if you're concerned about what's going on this week, we got you. It's coming out. So here we are. So I just say thanks, everyone, for listening and noticing when we didn't put it out, right?
That's a compliment to know that we're on a schedule.
I'm going to leave that person nameless.
Okay.
But, I did get a text message this morning kind of saying, hey, man, what's up?
Nothing's up. We just waited a day.
Yeah, That's it.
Yeah, well, we have a big show on tap here for you. As you mentioned, it's the final week of the regular season. Most of our teams are in action. The one team that is off is Creekview. They're going to be watching closely what happens in the crossover region amongst Blessed Trinity, Alpharetta, and Roswell. We'll break down those scenarios for you here this afternoon. We also have a couple of things that we'll be watching. Specifically, our game of the week will be Allatoona and River Ridge. The winner of that is the 4 seed and clinches a playoff spot. The loser goes home. So essentially, this is a playoff game.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Basically, you extend your season if you win. So I know that there's going to be a lot of energy on that, so we're looking forward to that, our game of the week. And then, of course, Sequoia and Woodstock going at it in inter-county play. Not too terribly much on the line in terms of playoff seedings, but if Sequoia wins, they do clinch their back-to-back Cherokee County title, which, of course, is a big deal around here. At least we think it is. And then Cherokee takes on Kennesaw Mountain, and Etowah takes on Rome. So we'll break down all those games for you specifically. We also have the new reclassification numbers have come in. We'll touch on that just a little bit. We will wait until we get some more information and see some of the appeals and also some of the early region alignments before we start to really get into the weeds on it. As of right now, the thing that I would tell you out there is that Etowah is making the jump to join Cherokee in the new highest classification, which is 6A. So they're doing away with 7A, which is going to confuse me for the rest of my life because I've gotten used to 7A. So 6A is the new highest, and Etowah will join Cherokee. There's a couple different ways the regions can go with that. We'll jump into that later, as I mentioned. And then also staying in 5A, or the second highest classification, are the other 4 schools, of course. That's Creekview, Sequoia, River Ridge, and Woodstock. And kind of the same thing there. They have a lot of different ways they can go with the regions. I think we might have our own way we would like it to go, and then we have our own way where we think it'll probably go.
Which we might not like.
Right. So what you like and what's going to happen may not be the same here.
Exactly.
But we'll wait too long. We won't wait until further down the road. But
one thing I want to say about this, and you talked about getting rid of 7A and haven't gotten used to that classification. While we're losing, at least in the playoffs, we're losing a classification. We're gaining one as well because they're going to carve out the private schools in Class A, Single A to Class 3A. Those private schools are going to play for their own state title game. So you're still going to have 8 titles. They're going to go back to the ranking system they used to use in Class A public, Class A private. It is just going to be a hot mess down there. So much more to be seen there. But let's talk about a little Cherokee County football before we get to the region realignment.
All right. Well, as we always do, we start in alphabetical order. So let's start with the Cherokee Warriors. 1-8 on the season. The playoffs are pretty much a no-go for the Warriors at this point. From here on out, you're looking to build momentum moving forward. They're going to play Kennesaw Mountain, who's also 1-8 and also mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. So I had somebody reach out, and they wanted us to discuss for a minute a little bit about this region and why it seems like Cherokee is struggling so much in this region. So I would like to take people on a little bit of a history lesson.
All right.
If you will allow me.
I love history.
All right. First of all, North Cobb and Walton. They're historically great programs, okay? And when we saw the region alignments come out, we kind of knew what was going to happen with that. I think that, Walton is probably even better than what we thought they would be. But North Cobb is, I think, kind of right where we thought they would be. Outside of a surprising win over Milton, in a way, I think they are who we thought they were in a way. So let's talk about the teams around that.
Sure.
Okay, Osborne, right, sitting at 7-2. They're going to get ready to play North Cobb, which I would think is
North
a loss.
Cobb is a favorite, right?
Let's say they finished the year 7-3.
Mm-hmm.
When's the last time you think they finished not only above 500, but with 7 or more wins?
Now, Osborne, they got their first Cobb County win since like 2003. I think it was their first region win since like 2011. I think you had to go back to like when I was in high school, maybe like even before then, but I'm going to say like 93.
1994 was the last time they won 7 or more games. They went 9-2
All right,
that year.
They won. They went to the playoffs. They lost they lost. They would have lost a first-round game.
Yep. So outside of that, they've only won 7 or more games 5 times in their history. So this year is an outlier. They're doing what they historically have never done.
So the comment I made about them last year, of them kind of being a
doormat,
is not wrong.
No, not historically.
I mean, I'm not trying. There's, again, no disrespect to what Osborne was in years past. You're right. This year's an outlier.
Well, then that brings up Wheeler.
Okay.
Now, Wheeler does have a little bit more pedigree, although if you're a fan of recent history, that's not been the case necessarily. Of course, our good friend Coach Collins, which, by the way, we'll talk to him in a minute when we get to the River Ridge side of things. He was there from 2010 to 2018. He led them to some success that they hadn't had in a while, including 3 winning seasons while he was there and 3 playoff appearances. But when you talk about the fact that they are also 7-2 and they're going to face Walton, they are set to be 7-3 as well. When do you think is the last time that Wheeler won 7 or more games?
I would say it was probably under Coach Mike Collins.
It was not.
Oh, wow.
Coach Collins finished with 6 wins 3 different times.
Okay, so we're going to go back to, I would say, like 2009.
2006.
I'm close.
You are close.
I mean,
hey.
I mean, it only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades.
Yep. Now, they have historically, they had a couple years in the 80s, and they had a couple years in the 70s, and they had a bunch of years in the 90s where they were actually pretty good. But, again, historically, a little bit of an outlier that this year they have come back around, especially in recent history, to have 7 wins. So my point in saying all that, and the reason that I think this fan wanted us to address this maybe a little bit, is to remind Cherokee fans that there are times in high school football where teams make runs, and you think, what's going on here? A lot like 2018, Creekview, Sequoia, 2020, River Ridge, kind of those teams of destiny in some way. I'm not saying that Wheeler and Osborne are those, but this year in particular, they're doing things that they've not done in a long time.
Sure. And the stars kind of align. And then you look at, I would even go further into last year where you're looking at that region where we saw Wheeler coming up. They beat Cherokee last year. We saw Osborne coming up. They ran with Cherokee for a little bit. A team like Kennesaw Mountain, where Cherokee had to beat now their quarterback, Kanan Prangley, was injured, but Kennesaw Mountain, another team who had historically not been really good. They get it turned around. They win a region before reclassification. They jump into this region for a couple years, and that was a team that we thought would be right up there in the playoff hunt. So I think you have to kind of step back and take a look at the bigger picture. And we say that, when we say things like, hey, this ain't your mama's Osborne, we mean, that's a hint that, hey, we've kind of looked at the tape, and these guys are a little bit better than what they have been. And it's cyclical. I think people would say, maybe you would say, well, how come Cherokee isn't, there aren't kids moving in here just to play football.
Right.
I mean, you kind of get what you get, and you've got to make, they make the most out of it. And hey, they've had some pretty good seasons. All right, this one isn't one of them by all accounts if you're looking at the record. And, we in 7A, it's tough.
Yes.
And I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for anybody. It's just tough. That's just part of it. I think you did a good job of running through it. The perennial powers of North Cobb and Walton, and then
the bad luck you had pulling, up and coming Wheeler and an up and coming Osborne.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the crux of the whole thing.
Right.
And I think that, again, that's why I think in that conversation I had with this fan, that was kind of my point. Was,
sure.
And I just, the reason I brought it up is I feel like there are probably other fans that feel that same way. And I just want to address that concern. And again, kind of like you, not making an excuse. Their record is what their record is. But there is a reason that you look at some of these scores at the end of the day and go, that wasn't even really close. And I think that's kind of the metric where it's become, is that the other schools that are around Cherokee right now are having good years. And the nice thing about that is that those schools are, as your point is, don't move in. They don't move a lot of kids to play football. That will all regulate. Now, again, it doesn't matter next year because this is all getting reclassified. Maybe we end up in the same region, something similar, maybe not. We'll figure that out later. But I just wanted to preface that before we jump into Kennesaw Mountain.
Okay. I mean, that's, again, it's like saying, hey, Vandy beat Florida and Kentucky last year in the back-to-back weeks, right?
That is true.
And now they struggle.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen very
right.
often.
You just kind of, yeah.
You have to put it correctly.
There are statistical outliers, as we would say in the statistics world.
That is correct. So let's jump into a not really statistical outlier. That is Kennesaw Mountain, who is at the same record as Cherokee. Again, both these teams at 1-8. This game will be at Cherokee, so that's good news for the Warriors. Hopefully some Cherokee fans can go out and support their club before they wrap up the season this year. I think the storyline for Cherokee is fairly simple, the same it has been for a while now. I think it's one of those things where you're going to have to figure out how to take care of the football. Kennesaw Mountain has had their fits and starts as well. I think this is the definition of which you're not always your record in some cases. When you talk about the strength of schedule, Kennesaw Mountain really front-loaded themselves. I mean, they took on Creekside, Campbell, North Paulding, and Harrison out of the region. Then they did beat South Cobb, which South Cobb is also not a great program historically and certainly not this year either. But then when they get into the region, they've had a harder time with the opponents than the other ones did. I think they played Wheeler 36-29 last week. That was actually a pretty impressive outing for Kennesaw Mountain. And they had Wheeler on the ropes a couple times.
Yeah, they
were
did.
up early, and you and I were on air kind of watching that score saying, what's going on here? Because that would make things fairly interesting. Not so much for Cherokee, but for Kennesaw Mountain, it would make them somewhat interesting.
Right.
So either way, it didn't end up working out that way. But Kennesaw Mountain's not a team you can sleep on either. So I think that Kennesaw Mountain fans probably feel the same way about us as we do them in that sense. So, I think we're back to the same old thing. Cherokee's got to establish the running game, and they got to take care of the football. And it's the oldest cliches in the book, but that has been the sword that Cherokee has lived and most of the time died by this year, and they got to stick with it.
Yeah, it's been tough sledding for Kennesaw Mountain. Look, they've got a running back, Chase Jones. I think he's got about a little over 500 yards and just a couple of touchdown carries on the season. I think those stats are through the first 8 games. I don't think they have updated their stats from last week. Tyson Harmon, again, through 8 games, 871 yards. So they're not putting up a lot of numbers there offensively. So they're struggling to move the ball. And I think this game is going to come down to which team can run the football, eliminate turnovers, right? That's nothing new here. On the other end, and Cherokee's been a much more, a team much more apt to put the ball in the air. Savasier Stone for over 1,700 yards with 9 touchdowns. And so you look at that offensively. I think Cherokee probably opens it up a little bit more than Kennesaw Mountain. But again, it's turnovers and running the football. I think the Warriors had one of their worst outings last week running the football. And it just kind of tough sled. And you also look at the opponent. That they probably plays into it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you're behind the 8 ball trying to play catch up, so you're not running the ball as much. But I think you have two teams playing for pride. Probably, and I don't want to discount Coach Carmian over there at Kennesaw Mountain, but I think in his ball club, but I think for the Warriors playing at home, playing for your seniors at home is probably something that maybe the Warriors can rally around this week. We say this week in and week out, man. what could have been in a couple of games, and does that change the trajectory of the season? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, again, that game at home, so make sure if you are a Cherokee fan, go out and support the Warriors. This will be the last home game of the year for the Warriors, and we will keep you updated on the score if you're not able to make it on the Game of the Week broadcast on Station Head app, stationhead.com, so tune in with us if you're not able to be out there. If you were ready, let's move on to the Grizzlies.
Let's do it.
Creepy's in an odd spot, which puts us in an odd spot in the podcast format because they get a bye week. They did last week. They played Rome. It kind of went as expected in a lot of ways. The second half looked a lot better than the first half. They were able to move the ball a little bit at times. Jackson Stanley, who was our player of the week, and then Nick Vaccaro had some big catches down the stretch. Really kind of seemed like they were getting some consistency there. I think the big thing for Creekview fans is that they get a bye week this week, and they are 95% sure they know who they're playing, and that would be Blessed Trinity. Now, there is a way where if Alpharetta beats Roswell this week, that there would be a three-way tie amongst all of them at one loss. Unfortunately, we do not know the tiebreakers for that region, so we can't help you out to determine that. That's something that they're going to have to figure out for us. But I think if you're a Creekview fan, you're really hoping that does happen, because then you would, it depends what the tiebreaker is, right? I mean, so I think it kind of depends. Would you rather, because you could end up playing Roswell at the end of the day.
Right.
So Blessed Trinity may not be the worst thing, but you could also end up playing Alpharetta. So I don't know what to expect with that one, but I think Creekview, if I was Creekview, I would just start preparing in my head as a coaching staff. Maybe you don't bring it to the kids yet and make them watch film on Blessed Trinity, but you kind of start in your head developing a game plan for that and some things you want to see differently. Now, I know most coaches take the bye week to focus on themselves, which is good, as they should. And I think that this is a good time for a bye week for Creekview because, again, last year, we kind of talked about it with Coach Williams last week on the podcast. They sat there watching the other games, waiting to see if their season was done in October or if they were actually going to get to use the bye week, and they ended up not being able to. So all of that considered, you got to feel better where Creekview's at this year than last year, obviously, but also in a large point, the bye week could be greatly beneficial to them.
Yeah, I think it at one point you allow yourself to get healthy.
Yep.
I think there's probably different schools of thoughts either way. Do you want to have the bye week knowing you're going to the playoffs? Will you be rusty? Will you be ready to play? How sharp will your team be?
Right.
I think you're right, Coop. It's a little bit tough trying to figure out exactly, who you're going to play, but I would imagine that the coaching staff is probably making some calls to trade some game film already on maybe a couple of different opponents, potential opponents, just to kind of get an idea of what that looks like. But you're right. I would imagine that Coach Williams and his staff has been working on their guys, working on them, trying to get right, and not having the benefit is, again, another week to get healthy. So, any guys that are nicked up, banged up, you get them healthy, get them right, and go into next week ready to rock and roll for a playoff game. And again, they have the luxury of knowing, hey, we get one more week of practice, right, one more week to, as Coach Williams mentioned last week, to evaluate some younger guys for next season, just to kind of get an idea of what does this look like. And look, maybe I'm looking through at this with Cherokee color glasses, okay, or Cherokee County color glasses. I just feel like the matchups are probably a little more favorable this year than they are last year.
I agree.
Save for Roswell. I think.
Yeah.
I think.
I would rather play Roswell than Langston Hughes last year.
Well, I guess what I mean is maybe you have an opportunity to be a little more competitive. And I'm not taking anything away from – I think Roswell at the number one seed, I don't think anybody really wants to go in that game saying, yeah, we drew them. I think you go into a game with Alfred and Blessed Trinity and say, okay, there's our likelihood of winning this game, percentage-wise, is probably a bit higher. Yeah. Well,
and that's if you take a look at the early predictors from the mathematical side, they're all fairly even. They're within one or two possessions of each other. If you take Sequoia to play Alpharetta, Sequoia is favored by 3. If you take Creekview to play Blessed Trinity, I think they're an underdog by 8 or something like that. So that's well within the realm of margin of error.
Yeah.
So it certainly seems like, at least in the first round, I like the fact that these two teams are playing, not only the proximity, because of the travel, you should be able to relatively go out, if you're a fan, if Creekview goes on the road to Blessed Trinity or to Alpharetta or Roswell, that will be a trip that Creekview fans can make and should make. Same thing with River Ridge. If they do end up beating Allatoona this week, that should be a trip that they can make and should make. And then Sequoia obviously gets the game at home, but I would think that Alpharetta, Blessed Trinity, Roswell fans
would travel
also,
just as well.
Right. So I think it makes a better atmosphere than sometimes when you do get to that crossover region where you have to go play a Langston Hughes or you and I did South Paulding.
Yeah,
that wasn't there. I mean, there's just no way to get there.
And by the way, you're mentioning that, and I thought that was a great crowd that came out to support the Chiefs last year at South Paulding.
Absolutely.
So I think our county teams, I do believe once we get to this part of the season, they do get behind their boys and they will travel. But I agree with your point. The proximity this year is much easier. So we don't have any excuses.
No, none. So make sure we'll talk about that next week, obviously. And we're just excited we get to do another week of the podcast.
Yes.
But either way, that is the Creekview side of things. You have anything to add about the Grizzlies?
Hey, man, enjoy the week off, Grizzlies, and get healthy. I don't know if there's any moral victories in putting up 19 points against Rome. I think. Well,
so one thing I would say is that they did. It seemed to us, doing, while you were doing the play-by-play, by the way, fantastic job.
Well, thank you.
Is that they found some rhythm with his receivers there at the end that I think maybe that Creekview passing game hasn't had consistently, and they did it without Cal Schubert and they did it without Roach. So it was really Nick Vaccaro, Nathan Augamang, and then Jackson Stanley. That was kind of the three guys there at the end where they kind of started putting it together a little bit, and then the two Penrod brothers also kind of came in on that offensive side of the ball and were a part of it more than usual. So I think that there could be some elements to that where you can build that depth a little bit, because we've kind of said this all year. Watching Nathan and Nick, when you see them out wide, one of them 6'4", one of them 6'5", you kind of sit there and you're like, why? What's the disconnect here? Because they're not getting a lot of touches, but I think that that's just some things with repetitions that they haven't had. And I think when you can do that against a team like Rome, because Rome didn't pull the starters until late.
Yeah, it was late in the third quarter, early fourth.
Yeah, so, they were getting some scores in against the ones there. So I think that hopefully that can be something that in the playoffs you can know that you have that rapport with those guys, and hopefully you can take advantage of that, and you're not such a 1, 2, 3 trick pony.
Yeah, I agree, Coop. You're talking about 5 receivers, and then they had to be thrust into action because of the injuries. So,
right.
And I think that might be one of the reasons why they haven't gotten a ton of touches, because Schubert and Roach have had such a phenomenal season.
Yeah.
For they've been, for the vast majority of the season, they've been healthy, and they've been a key cog in the success of Creekview. So again, great for those youngsters to get thrown into some live action and see them have some success. And I think that's what second half, that game got out of hand quick, fast, and in a hurry. If anybody hadn't seen Rome play, it's like an avalanche.
It's like the first quarter, they have no momentum, and then the second quarter, and you blink, and it's like, what just happened?
Yeah, it's like 8 possessions, 7 touchdowns.
Yeah,
and it's like, wow.
Yeah,
we saw the punter guard high maybe like 4 times, but all but one of those was in the second.
Yeah,
second half. Yeah. So.
Either way, Creekview will greatly benefit from the bye week, and we'll talk more about the Grizzlies next week when we know who they're actually playing.
Yeah.
All right, well, that brings us on to Etowah, who is going to play Rome this week. We'll talk about that matchup. Looking back, they played River Ridge. Really great game on both sides for both teams, I think, in a lot of ways. Etowah surprised us. Just after what we had seen against Allatoona. And obviously, we've talked about the injuries at this point ad nauseum, so no reason to harp on that anymore. Jack Strickland had a big game, nearly 250 passing yards, got it done on the ground and through the air. The defense did a great job as far as I can tell. River Ridge has consistently put up in the 30s this year, and holding them to, at least, around that number is pretty impressive. So I liked what I saw from Etowah. It's kind of that too little too late kind of aspect where they were already on the outside looking in. Now, if they had won that game, they would have a mathematical chance to get in, but they would have had to beat Rome. Now they are eliminated, obviously not having a region win yet. They will face Rome this week, as I mentioned, and I believe that game is at Barron Stadium. So that's not an easy place to play either. But, for the Eagles, you kind of hate to say the same thing over and over again, but you get to the final score and you think, what if we just had one of those guys back? would that have been the difference? And I think in a game like that, it certainly might have been. But credit to the Knights, they pull off the win, and you can't discredit that either. So for Etowah, getting ready to play Rome, it's not a great matchup for anybody in Cherokee County. Hardly anybody in the state matches up very well against Rome. I think this might be a time where you let your seniors put their best effort out and see what they can do. And then I think there might be an element to this where you see some of the younger guys and see what they have to offer.
Yeah, quite possibly. I think and even I don't want to get in Coach Reed's head over there at Rome, but can't imagine you're going to see a lot of their number ones for the entirety of the game.
Yeah.
If Etowah is able to stick around, if they can, I think what Etowah has to do to stick around. All right, I'm going to give you a formula. I'm not going to say it's easy. Mm-hmm. All right, the theoretical formula is, man, force one or two scores. Try to you go up. I think you have to force a turnover, go up by 8-9 points, and see possibly if Rome gets rattled. I mean, again, the region title is already in hand. They're not playing for seeding or anything. I think right now it's the perfect region record. They've already lost a regular season game. They won a region title. I think they want to be as healthy as possible going into week one of the playoffs. So I think maybe if you kind of shock them a little bit, I don't know. Maybe they kind of fold. I don't know if that's easier said than done. I can't imagine if Rome folding with the amount of the athletes they have on both sides of the ball. One thing that we did see was, and you're going to have to help me out.
Jaden Harmon got.
Thank you. Yeah, he got nicked up, and we don't really like to talk a ton about injuries, but it was something that we saw in the ball game.
It didn't look fantastic.
Right, so we don't know if he'll go or not, or maybe that's one of those things where, all right, you know what, we trust our guy behind him, and we're going to get you healthy for the playoffs here. But I think you got to find a way for Walker Hughes to get going. Jack's got to be on point, limit turnovers, and even then, your defense really has to get pressure on Reese Fountain. And we talked about it on the broadcast. They do such a good job of reading. It's not complex, but they read the defense. The wide receivers block well. Rome didn't take a ton of shots downfield. It wasn't a lot of 7-step drops and letting a guy run under the football. So I think your defensive backs are going to have to make tackles and maybe find a way to get pressure on Fountain, which I don't think he's faced a lot of adversity this season.
No, I don't think so. And I agree with you. I think that they're going to have to, the players are going to have to make plays at some point, and this is that element of that game. I agree with you to a certain extent. You kind of have to wonder, we talked about with Coach Reed last week on the podcast about complacency. Mm-hmm. You do have to wonder what the mindset is going into a game like this where it really isn't for much. It's more for just the idea that you can have an undefeated season, or at least a undefeated region schedule, I should say. So I don't know what the energy level will be like. That would be a great win for Etowah. They have had, in Coach Kemper's history at Etowah, they have had a history of winning games that they quote unquote shouldn't. The first 2 years he was there, comes to mind the Alpharetta win, where we were sitting there and you kind of look at the end of the season and it's like, they won that game, yeah. So maybe it's possible for Etowah. Everybody has to play their best game of the season.
Right.
And, again, knowing what we know about Etowah with their struggles on personnel side with just the injuries and the lack of experience that brings, it is a tough place. And Barron Stadium's not an easy place to go play, especially come November.
Yeah, I think it is, on paper, it's the uphill battle, like you said, in November. I think, if Rome starters play the first half, I think this game probably, as most Rome games do, get out of hand around the end of the first, midway through the second quarter, and it's just a barrage of touchdowns, and it does, like I said, it's like an avalanche. It doesn't take long, and then again, that kind of wraps up the season for both these schools.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on. Of course, we skip River Ridge, our game of the week, so we will move on to Sequoia, who had a big win over the Allatoona Bucks that we will see this week. And then they're going to face Woodstock this week. I think for Sequoia, they made us feel a lot better. you and I kind of after seeing Alatuna handle Etowah, we're kind of sitting there thinking, here we go again. Alatuna's about to rattle off these last 3-4 wins, and they're going to get into the playoffs and really mess up things for Cherokee County. Fortunately, that at least didn't happen on Friday. Look, Sequoia, I think, is a very interesting team because their losses make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. It makes sense who you lost to. And, when I did the report on our website, the worst team they've lost to, according to rankings, is Raven Gap, which, hey, if that's your worst loss,
right,
I'll take it.
Right.
So I think there's an element to that certainly helps. But I think the thing that I like most about Sequoia is the way that they're getting it done on both sides of the ball. The offense, scorching hot coming out of the bye week. Bretton Darling's made a huge impact out at wide receiver as well as safety. Of course, Jackson Hancock does his thing. And then, Will Rzecki, Ian Mariah, those guys that just continue to be impressive and put in the production. So I just think that Sequoia this year, a lot of times in the county we say they're an athlete away. I don't think we have to say that about Sequoia this year. I think that they are athleted up, if that's the term you want to use. I think that they have the athletes to run with a lot of teams. And they will face Woodstock this week that we talked about, and we'll talk about the Woodstock aspect a little bit later. But what did you think about Sequoia in that win? Because, you and I were sitting there, we kind of looked at each other, and it's like, okay, all right. That's kind of what we were hoping was going to happen.
Right. I think you have an Alatuna team that came in there that was game. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, there was no rust there. This is what I thought. I saw that Colby Martin threw for 305 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Who would have ever thought that a Sequoia quarterback under Coach Teeter would ever throw for 300 yards?
I mean, talk about it, man. He's having a season now, Coop. He's got over 1,200 yards passing, 12 TDs, and also, again, completing 63% of his passes. And you mentioned Bretton Darling moving over there. I think Sequoia is doing a pretty good job of putting their best players in position to make the best plays. And that's, they figured out, okay, Bretton can go both ways, and Jackson certainly been going both ways and giving them success. Rzecki's been doing a good job as a back and out of the backfield. They've been doing a good job of mixing and matching those receivers. And again, 305 passing yards for a Sequoia quarterback. I
wonder when the last time that happened.
I don't know, but that's I'm impressed. I'm sure that that Coach Teeter might be able to tell us. It may have been before his time. I can't recall if Collier Paith had over 300 yards in a game, but I think that was it was a good win for Sequoia. I think you turn the page to this week, and I won't completely preview the game, but I think I feel like they're like Rome. They're playing for the mythical county championship that probably only means anything to Sequoia and us, just so we can say that at this point in the season. And so I think if you're Coach Teeter, you probably want to get out of this game, healthy. Mm-hmm. Get your guys, maybe get them a good lather, and I'm not saying they're pulling their starters at halftime, but
I think that brings up a good question: is do you let guys, like we're talking about them working both ways so much? Do you tell Ian Mariah that he's going to be only defensive end on third down? Do you tell these guys that they're going to be, load management's such a dirty word nowadays, but there is an element that you do have to think about, just limiting.
I think when you start telling guys. Right. Well, maybe you set the expectation, but I think what you want is your guys to go out and play hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think when the injuries happen, when you're like, oh well, we're gonna try to rest you, and we're only gonna play you 44 plays, and so the player might think, oh, okay, well, I don't have to go hard, and I don't.
Right. I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm just saying that I wonder what the element of, I don't know the best way to put it necessarily, but the idea that they need to. Just manage expectations somewhat in that variety as well. Because I think that there's two elements to that, right? You can put your foot on the gas and you're going to get up by 35 and then you can take your starters out, or there's an element to it where you can kind of ease off at your leisure.
Nah, I'm putting my foot on the gas.
And I think that's probably what you do, but I do think you also have to decide for yourself what you want to do as far as some of those things are concerned when it comes to negating risk,
sure.
Really, I mean, to put it simply. And I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. And that's why I'm not a coach.
Well, I think injuries are a part of the game that you don't necessarily plan for to say, okay, we know that a certain percentage of our kids are going to get injured. But I just don't think. I think if that's the case, then I don't know. I think you have to keep your kids sharp. Sequoia right now is playing at such a high level. I don't think you want to do anything to upset the apple cart there.
So to answer our trivia question, I don't know that he ever got to 300, but Pace did have 280 against Creekside in 2018
in that playoff game.
Yep. So that's the highest that I've seen.
Okay.
Going back, and I'm just kind of looking through here. So that probably is a very high total comparatively to what it has been at times. Yeah, I mean, you start, their average is usually in the hundreds, if not the lower side of the hundreds. So they certainly are above what we've been thinking. So, but again, I think that says a lot about the combination that they have with Colby Martin in his second year. I know that we kind of felt like last year and going into this year, we wondered, now that they had some of those quarterbacks back that got injured to start last year, were they going to go to them? And they didn't. Mm-hmm. And I remember we kind of sat there and thought, well, is one of those guys better than Colby? And quite frankly, they haven't. So shut up. And that's kind of how it has been. So big credit to Colby and big credit to that offense. And I think the idea that they're using the guys that they need and the tight end position's been utilized a good bit. But I'll tell you the biggest credit to them is the offensive line, which really has been a moving section of pieces. We've seen a lot of names come in and out of that rotation at times, and they've done a great job plugging and playing and getting who they need in at those right times and being able to convert when they need to convert. So, and again, I think the reason that we harp on the offense at this point is because the defense has so much attention put on it because of what it does, and it continues to do well.
Is it because of their coordinator, or is it because of their players?
Well, that's what you say.
Look, speaking of their players, Matthew Matz leading the way with 7 sacks. We talk about Ian Mariah, Boranat doing a great job as well at tackle. We talked about Darley and Hancock, but one of the guys I think is most impressive is Agundale and Coop. I'm going to come to your fact here in just a second.
Okay, I found it.
Agundale, 59 tackles. I believe he's second on the team with 59 tackles. He's also missed, I think, 3 games. So just a machine and speed at linebacker for them. So I did want to give their defense a shout out. They've sacked opposing quarterbacks 23 times on the season. So, I think it takes 2 to tango. They've got some players they can put in spots to make plays, and they've done that.
All right. So the last time Sequoia threw for 300 yards was, let me get the official date on this. This was,
oh boy, I see the opponent.
They're
not going to like this.
No, they're not. It was 2015. I'll get the date in just a second. Austin Tracy was 22 of 28 for 312 yards, 3 touchdowns. His number one receiver with 206 yards was Darian Rakestraw.
Yeah, Darian actually spent some time at Colorado as a wide receiver.
Well, there you go. So 206 yards for him. That game was September 18th of 2015.
Man.
So that's the last time Sequoia threw for over 300 yards.
All right, there you have it.
So that's a deep pull there for you. So
there we go. There we go.
That's one that I'm going to put on the trivia questions later because that's like, I don't know.
But I mean, now it makes sense. When you mention Rakestraw, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But
so, all right. Well, anything to add on Sequoia there? I mean, obviously we talked about the Woodstock game there a little bit. That game on Friday night, we'll cover the score on the game of the week and make sure we keep you updated on that front.
I mean, I might just call out Coach Buddy to say, for the first time since he's come on the podcast, his defense has held somebody to under 20 points. So,
ooh. So you're saying he got a little big for his britches there?
I don't know. Maybe it's bad luck for him coming on the podcast. I don't know.
Maybe why he's not back, right?
That might be. I mean, Coach, we miss you. That's my message to Coach Buddy, and that's it.
All right. Well, let's move on. And as we mentioned, we will move on to Woodstock, who Sequoia will be facing. Woodstock coming off of a bye week. And I think for Woodstock, it's a good timed bye week because this is going to be their most important game of the season at this point. They get it at home, I believe. I believe it's at the Woodshed.
It is.
So a big deal for Woodstock here. You feel like it's kind of the same element of the game that we were talking about where they're a dangerous team because they are clicking at the right time, and they've put together some really good performances as of late. And Sequoia is going to have to be ready. Now, again, if Woodstock wins, it doesn't really do anything in terms of playoffs, nor does Sequoia really lose anything, but just the conversation around football in Cherokee County would change so drastically, especially when we start talking about, you and I doing the preseason show next year. Imagine if we hop on that Woodstock segment and say, they did beat the number 2 seed in Sequoia, right there at the end of the year. So I think there's a lot to play for Woodstock in this element, and I like the matchup in some regards. I do think that the key to the game is establishing the short passing game. I think they've done a good job of establishing the running game, but that secondary for Sequoia, they're ball hunters, they're ball hawks, and they're going to have to make sure that Peyton Lynch throws the ball in the correct spots, and he's done a great job of that for his credit, and he's very, very efficient with passing the ball over the middle. He's got a good arm and can fit it in windows. And then I think defensively, you really kind of look at what Sequoia is doing, and you have to find a way to negate some of what they do vertically. And that's a challenge. That's easier said than done, but I think that pass rush is going to have to get home that it has at times this year, especially when you talk about the Lassiter game. They're going to have to continue that production up front.
Yeah, Woodstock success is going to come through the air, and I think you're going to have Kalina and Renninger. They're going to have big games for the Wolverines to get this. They have had some success with running the football. I think Isaiah Payton has played most of the snaps last time out. He's now the new rushing leader for the Wolverines, but we've seen Sherrod Ellie and even Evan Stacy get some carries. They're probably going to have to do just enough to keep the Sequoia Chiefs off balance. And then force turnovers. Look, they, maybe call it an emotional game, call it a weird game because it was on a Thursday, but They were in the football game last time out against Creekview. So they are doing some things right. I think it's just for them. I think again it snowballed in the wrong direction for them last time out. But it's a team that you can see that they are moving in the right direction. They expect to make some plays. They move the football down the field a few times, but again they're going to have to convert those opportunities into field goals and touchdowns and not drought stalling outs and punts. And last week something that I'll address last time out, and I'm pretty sure that Coach Devine knows this, man. That special teams kind of killed them. Creekview got them on a kind of they had a pooch kick on a kickoff that Woodstock didn't recover, and then two big punt return. So I think the special teams is going to be something because for as good as Jackson Stanley was for Creekview, if you're punting the ball to Jackson Hancock for Sequoia, I think, man, I'm kicking that ball as far away from that kid as possible. So I think Woodstock, their defense is going to have to find a way to shut down the run. I typically would say shut down the run, but really it's been the throwing, of Colby Martin. But can you cover Bretton Darling? Can you cover Jackson Hancock? Can you cover Rijecki out of the backfield? I think that's going to be a key for them. And again, like I said, you got to put the ball in the end zone. At some point. Your point of regardless of the playoff implications, I think for Woodstock, it's just especially for these younger players. Now, I think the seniors have already done their job in leaving a legacy. Okay, we struggled for a couple years. We've got a couple of wins under our belt. We're changing the direction of this ship. I think that has been fantastic. I think this would be like a cherry on top for them to beat Sequoia, regardless of county titles or whatnot. I think it would just be cherry on the top for a guy like Peyton Lynch, who's been there, who's been through 3 different head coaches now and a couple of those players. So hats off to Lynch, to Kalina, guys like that. I think we know Burmeister I believe is a junior. He'll be back, but I think it's a game for those guys to maybe set the tone for the off season and for what's next, because I think that greater things are yet to come here for these Woodstock Wolverines. Yeah, and the way you end the season really carries a lot of momentum into the offseason, just from the coaching messaging and, the belief. But I think they've already, we kind of talked about it, not to sell too much into it, but when they beat Cambridge in the scrimmage, they got to say we won at least a game at home. It didn't count, but it was a game at home. The scoreboard at the Woodshed said we won something. Right. That counts. Right. And then you go to Lassiter and win, and then you beat Etowah in a region game, and that's a big deal as well. So they've really crossed off the 3 checks when you talk about getting a team back to where they can believe. You did it in the region, you did it on the road, and you did it at home. So all of that, their next step is playoffs, I think, would be what they want to achieve next year. Sure. I think would be a goal. So I think that they're trending in the right direction. Again, I think this is a game that Sequoia won't take lightly.
easily, nor can they, because Woodstock is going to give their best effort. But I agree with you, and I think that the element of being at home is a big deal for Woodstock, because they are playing in front of their home crowd and get to kind of send this one out in their the way that they can put the best effort together.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, if you were ready, let's talk about our game of the week with River Ridge and Allatoona.
Man, game of the week. We get to see the Bucks twice this season, huh?
Yeah, let's hope that Allatoona is 3-0 during our broadcasts that you and I have called together. 3-0.
2-3? Am I missing a game?
Etowah, Allatoona last year, River Ridge, Allatoona last year.
That's right.
Etowah, Allatoona this year.
I conveniently forgot that game that Etowah was almost, I think, were they winning almost the entire game?
Pretty much the entire game, and then Allatoona did what Allatoona does, and they lined up in the I formation and decided to win late in the fourth.
Well, that's what they used to do.
Well, that is true.
Let's talk about it.
All right, let's jump into it. Look, first of all, talking about River Ridge, we talked about the win last week against Etowah. Very impressive win for River Ridge. I mean, they had to do what they had to do. The game, by the end of it, didn't actually matter for region standings, funny enough. But I think for River Ridge, it continues, county rival, you want to get those wins, and they certainly did. And hopefully gives them the right attitude moving forward into this game. Allatoona, on the other hand, kind of got smoked by Sequoia. Now, at the end, the score wasn't that lopsided, but it was ugly pretty early. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that this is a matchup that does favor River Ridge. They are at home. That certainly helps. And they know what Allatoona is, because they have seen Allatoona beat Woodstock and Etowah now. And we see how close Etowah played River Ridge, so you can't take them lightly. I think that this will be a game that River Ridge is going to be in prime position to win. I think the matchup is not great for Allatoona, given the talent that River Ridge has on the outside. But I do also worry River Ridge has been very susceptible to the running game, and that is something that Allatoona could certainly take advantage of. So I don't know what the over-under on this one is, but I'm taking the over.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Coop.
Which means it'll be 7-3.
You got two teams with quarterbacks with strong arms, and you know what? Sadiq Teal might have a stronger arm than Speck here, but we've seen both these guys with the ability to throw the ball deep. Teal maybe is kind of the hardest guy to figure out as a quarterback over at Allatoona. We've seen him a couple weeks ago looking really good. We've seen him a year ago looking really good, and we've seen him a couple times looking like, man, this, he's got a lot of work to do, but they're peaking at the right time. You talked about the run game. Rucker, again, 516 yards, only 2 rushing touchdowns, so they're not scoring a ton of points on the ground, but he's Teal's found, Aiden Gilbo, the tight end, the wide receiver that's been really good for them is Camden Phillips. They got a couple other guys that fill in nicely. They're just as physical. I don't think they have the bodies, even putting eyes on them again this year.
Yeah.
They don't have the bodies that they had last year, but they're just as physical. Now, the game that we saw them in, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, is that maybe that was a little emotional for them. It was senior night over there at Cobb EMC Stadium. You mentioned going on the road. They'll be at River Ridge this week, and the Knights, as you mentioned, coming to this game, they've got to be feeling good about getting the monkey off their back. I think they snapped a 3-game skid with that win. So anytime that you're in a game like that that's going down to the wire, maybe there's some doubt. Oh my gosh, are we really going to lose? Our 4th game in a row. What goes on to that mindset of these kids? But GVG, man, he's able to knock down a 50-yarder to send the Knights. And as you mentioned, didn't necessarily, because of the outcome of the Sequoia Allatoona game, River Ridge didn't have to win this game to qualify for the playoffs. But for them, they wanted to make sure that they left no doubt that this was
Well, the momentum helps a tremendous amount.
For sure.
So, I agree with you in that sense. I think the biggest thing for River Ridge is controlling the pace of the game. We saw Allatoona quickly come out against Etowah, and we blinked, and it was 14-0. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the game, you kind of felt like Etowah was just constantly playing catch-up. Now, River Ridge is such an interesting team to me. By the way, the over-under is 59. I'm still taking it. The over, I mean. But it's just such an interesting dynamic because they have been down big at times, and they just come back and they just keep hanging around, and then at the end it's kind of that last play that decides it.
Sure.
So I like River Ridge in that sense, but I would rather not do that. I'd rather this be a close game the entire way, or at least not in Allatona's favor the entire way, if you catch my drift. So I don't know where this really lines up. I think the matchup is certainly interesting. As you like to say, styles make fights. This is certainly a style of game that is going to be odd. I think both offenses do the thing that the defense is not great at. The other thing we saw with Allatona against Etowah is they were very, very, very physical, and to the point of pass interference every play pretty much. I mean, there were like 10 pass interference calls, and then a couple of targetings that got some folks sent to the showers. So I think that Allatona could be susceptible to that as well, where you tell a guy like Grant Hollier and some of these guys just, hey, run a straight go and just make them throw the flag and hope that the officials are some of the officials that are going to call it a little tighter than some that may not.
Look, if I'm Coach Collins, and we'll talk to him in just a second, I'm throwing at number 17.
Yeah,
like I'm challenging him. Sorry,
Yeah.
like he got picked on, and Etowah had a lot of success there. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I'm not going to put his name out there, but I'm throwing at that kid.
Yeah, I would too. That's there's certainly something there, at least that Etowah found, and I think that's not. I don't know that you fix that in a week.
I don't know either.
Or 2 weeks.
Maybe we'll ask Coach Collins about that. Maybe we won't. We'll see. But Coop, I think he's dialing in right now. You want to go to him?
Let's go to the phones. Let's talk to Coach Collins. Coach, thank you for being back with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, Coach. We always look forward to it. We're obviously covering the game against Allatoona this week. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. I want to go back to last week. You guys had a thriller of a game against Etowah, obviously very important in terms of region position, and pulled out a win there. And it seems kind of the theme with your team where you guys have been able to continue to battle. Now, sometimes those aren't wins, but you're always in the mix there. Can you talk a little bit about the resiliency of this team and how you guys are able to continue fighting deep into games?
Yeah, I'm so proud of them, and I agree. All year long, they've never had a quit in them. They always line up and play the next play. We were down last week at halftime, and it was a dog fight. But I think again, our senior leadership and even some of our underclassmen, they continue to just gut it out. I thought it was a character win and a gutsy performance from all of our guys that couldn't be proud of how they just continue to persevere through the game and have persevered through the season.
Coach, we don't talk enough about Grayson Van Gilder, and I'm going to tell him myself. For the last 2.5 years, I've been calling him Grayson Van Glider, and I told Will, earlier today, I said, I have a confession. I've been mispronouncing his name on the air, and nobody's called me out, so I'm calling myself out. But we've seen Van Gilder or GVG. It makes it easier for me to say so I don't mess that up. But we have seen him in the kicking game for you guys, and we've been impressed. What we know he hit the 50-yarder, but what's his range and how does he make special teams special for you all?
Well, he's a 55+ kid when he can catch it on the sweet spot. And he comes in with confidence, and he's kind of a guy that's got ice in his veins. He never gets rattled. And he works extremely hard. He's a two-sport kid. He comes out and he works his tail off and he gets his drills in. And he also goes and works at soccer. He's a really, really good soccer player as well. And I think that that competitive soccer team that he plays on has helped him out as far as football as well. And he's also got really good punting skills, and he's just an overall athlete. So we're glad to have him on our team.
Well, Coach, let's talk a little bit about the game on Friday. Of course, you guys taking on Allatoona. Winner gets the playoff spot. Loser goes home. This was a game we covered last year. Did not go the way that anybody in Cherokee County wanted it to go. But you guys get this one at home at the Ridge. How much of a difference does that make when it comes to a game like this when there is so much on the line?
I think it makes a big difference. First of all, we love playing in front of our home crowd. We think our home crowd is amazing with our student body and our community support. I think it's a big difference in having to load that bus and not having to ride out to that West Cobb area. You get to be in the comfort of your own field house, your own field, and I do. I think it makes a difference. At least I hope it'll make a difference this week. You know what I mean? So Definitely need to be a hostile crowd and need folks to come out and support us, and hopefully we can come away with a victory this Friday.
Coach, last year I believe you all were almost guaranteed a playoff game going into the last week of the season. This year, it's winner take all, and loser go home. Is there any added pressure, or do these kids feel that pressure, or you guys I would imagine your staff does, but what's been the attitude like with the young men? I assume they know what's at stake, but how has this week or these couple of days of practice leading up to this game, how has that been for you all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think there's any added pressure to it. The feeling is, first of all, you feel really good about yourself because you're able to play a meaningful football in November. And when you can look around and play meaningful football games in November in this state, in this area, you've done a pretty good job for yourself. So we're not going to have any added pressure because we feel pretty good about what we've accomplished to get here. So, we took a second to sit back and reflect on that. And then from there, you just go back to the same old things that you rely on all year long. Just play one game at a time, one practice at a time, one rep at a time, and you don't look at the bigger picture of what the consequences or the rewards may be. It's more important to focus on being the best player you can be inside of that play, inside of that moment. And then that way you don't feel pressure because the moment just doesn't get too big for you because you're not thinking about that. You just focus on that particular play and playing the next play the best of your ability. So we've been preaching that. We've been preaching that since day one. So I think there's not pressure there because our kids have been brought up into that culture, and that's what we've been relying on and we'll try to rely on Friday.
Well, Coach, talking about the game on Friday, let's get into the weeds here a little bit. Opponent Allatoona, I think everybody's probably pretty familiar with their trajectory this season after starting out pretty slow. They've rattled off a couple of wins and obviously put themselves in the mix. What do you see from the Bucks, and what's it going to take for you guys to be successful on Friday night?
I see that same type of approach and attitude that I've been able to watch Allatoona have for a long time. I think when it gets this time of year, they get better. And they're used to November football, and they've got a dynamic quarterback, a dual threat kid, and he's got some guys he can throw to with a big up physical offensive line and a running back beside him that can score from anywhere on the field, and a physical defense as well. For us to be successful, we're going to have to stop the run and establish the run ourselves. We need to win the turnover battle. That's been crucial for us throughout the year. When we can win the turnover battle, we give ourselves a chance. Got to make their defense defend the whole field, horizontally and vertically, and again establish that run game. And we need old Van Glider and all the special teams guys to help us win that special teams. That third phase is always crucial in these games. So we need to win special teams, and I think we check those boxes, get that crowd going, get something to go good early. I think we can have a chance.
Well, Coach, we certainly are looking forward to it and looking forward to the chance to be back out at the Ridge one more time this year. And we wish you the best of luck on Friday, and we'll see you Friday night.
Guys, always a pleasure talking to you, and I really appreciate it.
So, again, thank you to Coach Collins, wrapping up our regular season coaches interviews. And, of course, we continue this through the playoffs, so don't feel like this is the last podcast or this is the last coach we're going to talk to. As a matter of fact, normally with playoff coaches, we like to get all of them on.
So we might have a
three coaches.
Three coach.
Yep.
And just to preface, I know we'll get this at the end of the podcast, we'll probably have the same recording schedule next week because I have a conflict. I'm special.
Okay, there you go. Tell everybody. Let everybody know. It doesn't bother me. I'm here.
All right.
Either way, breaking down this game individually, we talked about it already, our game of the week. Make sure you join us, Station Head app, stationhead.com, or you can find us on northgasportsnetwork.com. This game is very simple. We talked about the scenario, win and get in, lose goes home. The passing game to me for River Ridge is the difference. The rushing defense for River Ridge is the difference in this one, I think. So all of that considered, one of the things that I think that Coach Collins talked about that is pretty key is the special teams. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, you talked about Grayson Van Gilder. Sorry, got that wrong for years. Grayson Van Gilder, who is able to kick 50, 55 yards. Right. That's a weapon because we know Allatoona has Gray Kelly, and he is also a weapon. So the special teams is certainly going to need to be even, and I think that could be the difference in a game like this. The weather looks to be clear but cold. As we're getting into November now, you kind of lose the 60, 70-degree kikioff temps. It's, by the end of the night, it'll be in the 30s again.
Right,
So
right.
All of that plays into it in a certain extent. I really don't know who to favor in this one. The early predictors have River Ridge by about 3 points. That sounds right to me. I don't hate that pick. I just don't know that Allatoona is that far behind River Ridge, even though the record may reflect that.
Yeah, I think 3 points is probably spot on. Like either way, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've got this game within a score because I think there are some things that, as you mentioned, River Ridge at times has struggled against a team that can run the ball well. So if they can find a way to bottle up Rucker and then force Teal to make some passes. Now I say that, and last time we saw Teal throw the ball, it was like, well, I mean, maybe you don't want him to throw the ball because he looked really good. But it's going to come down for River Ridge. It's going to come down to the ability of their linebackers to make plays and their defensive front. Their 3-down linemen for linebackers. And one thing we saw last week, if anybody watched the film, they River Ridge switched some things up, and they moved their big boy, Big John Faletra. He played a little nose guard last week, and he might be somebody that could be key to stop the run.
Yeah, you have to navigate how often to use him.
Sure.
Because I think he ended up playing like 120 snaps or something like that, which, hey, eat your Wheaties. But, you might have to.
He's a 17-year-old kid. He can do that, man.
Easy for you to say.
That's a lot of man to be running for 120 plus.
Well, not
plays.
only that, but it's he's playing on the line. It's not like he's playing receiver where there are times when he doesn't get contact. I mean, it is immediate contact and it's physical every single play. So hopefully, he's feeling all right. I bet that Saturday there was a lot of lounging around.
Yeah, maybe a nice bath.
I certainly would. But I agree with you. I think that we're seeing, whether it's Andrew Hand at receiver, whether it's John Fletcher on the defensive line, you do have to use the playmakers you have. Now, that's kind of the way that 6A football is right now, whether it's Sequoia, whether it's whether we're talking about River Ridge here. So there's certainly elements to that I think could help. I think the key is to navigate that when you need it. But look, River Ridge's got to pull out all the stops. They have to view this as a playoff game. Whatever you think you would keep in the bucket for next week, you can't do because there's not going to be a next week if you don't win this one.
Yeah, there is no tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think it's both teams, again, as you mentioned, playing for the right to represent Region 6A as a number 4 seed. And I think this one's going to go down to the wire. You mentioned it, special teams. You got 2 guys that can really kick the football. I think we will see if Accuray comes into play. Allatoona last time we saw him didn't really need the services of Greg Kelly in that ball game, but I think this one's going to be a little different. And look, this is again, the pedigree is there. They're used to playing this time of year. Coach Collins, alluded to that a little bit. So they're peaking at the right time in terms of Allatoona, their opponent. But I think that River Ridge coming off the snide and stopping that skid is right there in the mix as well. You got 2 backs that have rushed for a similar amount of yards, but I think the difference is that I think River Ridge has been more consistent throwing the football, and they will challenge the secondary. Same thing again, limit turnovers, run the football, score in the red zone.
Yep. It's the simple things we talk about every week that really make all the difference. There's a reason why we talk about them every week in a large sense. So that's pretty much all I got on this one. I mean, I think that there's a lot of unknowns. I think this may be one of the harder games to predict what's going to happen, but I agree with your sentiment that this is not a game that will get out of hand one way or the other. I think they're just too evenly matched in a lot of senses.
Yeah, just too evenly matched. I think it's going to, again, down to the wire. Most of the games that we've had this season have been extremely competitive. I don't think this one will deviate from that at all. Yeah, I'm looking forward to being out at the Ridge one more time to close out the season, Coop, and just wanted to kind of take a look now that we've kind of rounded out. I do want to talk about reclassification, but there are a few other games, within our regions. I won't go way too deep. In 7A, though, I do want to talk about, we talked about the Warriors. They'll be taking on Kennesaw Mountain. Osborne will be hosting North Cobb, and then Wheeler will host Walton to kind of close out the region play. How we think that's going to line up is Walton, North Cobb, Wheeler, Osborne will be the representatives from that region. And then I won't even get into the crossover regions. Since we don't have a team from the county playing, we're gonna we'll figure that out later on. We might talk about that next week and when the playoff brackets come out. Over in Region 7, 6A, Blessed Trinity will host Lassiter. Pope and Sprayberry. Now, this is a game that will determine, by our accounts, will determine that fourth seed in Region 7, 6A, the team that will have to travel to Barron Stadium and play Rome. And then maybe the most important game, though, of the night in Region 7, 6A in terms of crossover. You mentioned it, Roswell will host Alpharetta. That is a game, and bear with me 1 second, that's a game that Roswell won last season 38-21. Now, different year. Alpharetta's got a young up and coming quarterback, and DJ Bordeaux, I think is young man's name. He's got a nice arm. I believe he's just a sophomore, so he's been putting up some big numbers over there. So it might make things interesting. I think Roswell's probably got a little bit better, well-rounded team, but in a rivalry game, you don't know what's going to happen. So that's the crossover game, or crossover games in that region. So I'm not going to go into other ones around the area. Those we'll keep it short with those. Region 5, 7A, Cartersville, Cass, Dalton, Calhoun, Hiram, Woodland, Cartersville. That region is off this week. They've rounded out their schedule, and I don't know if we mentioned this on the air, but man, kind of crazy to think that Calhoun was the odd duck out in that one, and they'll be sitting at home, a perennial playoff team.
First time they've missed the playoffs since 1992.
Wow, man, I was still in high school.
Yeah,
that is crazy.
I wasn't.
You just weren't. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just.
I did not. I didn't exist yet.
Well, let's talk about something that does exist right now, Coop, and that is the fresh, hot off the press reclassification table. Now, this is a first look at it, the first go at it. They'll have a meeting, I believe, next week?
Next Wednesday.
Okay.
To determine the appeals process.
Yeah. So schools will be able to appeal where they stand in the reclass numbers. There's a full-time equivalent student count, and then they give them also a multiplier by out-of-zone students, and you get a final count. And I believe
times 3
multipliers. So any student that's out of zone, you multiply by 3. But Coop, talk about where our county teams kind of fit in right now.
Well, it's Cherokee and Etowah are going to be in 6A, which again is the new highest classification. I believe, again, we don't know necessarily what the region opponents are going to look like yet. They will have to determine if there are appeals processes going in there. There are a couple different ways they can go with this. Wheeler, Osborne, North Cobb, all those teams, Walton, that we know from this year are still in that same classification, but they can also go back to the old way where you could put them with the Alpharettas, and some of the Forsyth County schools. I think we would prefer Forsyth County in that area, but that would probably also put you in with Buford. So you kind of have to pick your poison. Would you rather play Buford or would you rather play Walton? I don't know that it makes a whole lot of difference in a lot of seasons, but that kind of is an idea on that front. So there's a couple different ways they can go with that. And the cutoff for that is 2,200 students. So Alpharetta is the last of that at 2,208 students. And then it starts with Lakeside DeKalb at 2,196. And then for 5A, which is where the other 4 county schools are, again, that's for Sequoia, Creekview, River Ridge, and Woodstock fans. They have a lot of different ways they can go with this. I mean, this is something that we're going to get the number, and there's a lot of ways that we can be really happy about it, but I get the feeling we're not going to be, just kind of a gut feeling here. First of all, you have Rome, who has they're right on the top of that mark there. They may be somebody that wants to move up. They typically don't like to move, but they're real close on the cusp. They may be one that does get moved up, and that would obviously change the region there. And an interesting note, with Rome being the second highest, Allatoona is the lowest. So both those schools could be moving up and out of the way. I don't think that'll happen. But then when you talk about the actual former opponents that are in this area, Dalton makes a reappearance in this, so they'll be in the same classification. Also, for more recent fans, that Johns Creek kind of area, Chattahoochee is back. I don't think we'll match up with that. It's just the numbers don't make a lot of sense. And then outside of that, it's kind of the typical side that you're used to seeing. There's Milton and Roswell, which does make a lot of sense. It's not great for football, but it makes a lot of sense as far as travel goes. And then you also do have the opportunity for some Cobb County schools because there's Sprayberry and Lassiter. So they have a few different ways they can go with that. I think we would prefer the Cobb County variety of Sprayberry and Lassiter. I don't know that that's what they will do. I think the least popular one would be if they did throw us back in with Rome and Dalton. And, you would also need to pick up a few other teams because it's important noticing that when we talk about 6A, they now have 65 schools, and there can only be 8 regions because the bracket has to work out with an even number. So you have to get 8. So you know that each school, each one's going to have 8, and then somebody's going to have 9. Yeah. Or you could have, a couple that have 7 and 9.
Right.
Well, 5A is 57 schools, so you're going to average about 7, and then you're going to need somebody that has an 8th or somewhere in that area. So you're talking about Creekview's going to need to find, or not Creekview, but Cherokee County is going to need to find 4 more schools to be with, and those 4 schools is going to be a difficult challenge to find which 4 fit in the best, and that's what the GHSA will work to do. But of course, this is a long process, so there's the appeals next week, which we'll talk about on the podcast when we see the appeals, if there's anything local, and then the regions, and then there are appeals within the region to play in other regions because of travel. There will be a lot to discuss when it comes to this, but that's kind of where we're at now. And again, when it does come out and we get the full thing, we will actually sit down and record a whole podcast episode, and we'll go sport by sport and talk about where this puts fans in those sports and what they can expect. And hopefully they can, we can keep you guys informed on what happens.
Yeah, it should be interesting, Coop. As you mentioned, there's a lot of familiarity there. I'm sure that folks in Cherokee County would be really thrilled to have to go back up to Dalton, on a Tuesday night to play a basketball game. Yeah, that sounds like so much fun. And of course, I've talked to some Dalton fans as well, and they kind of say the same thing. They're like, you really think we want to drive down to Canton on a Tuesday night to play a basketball game?
Yeah.
Or Woodstock, and it's tough. I think it's tough on both ends, but that's part of it for us being in a county that's on the northern end of the metro, where we are going to get some of those outliers like Rome and Dalton from time to time. Now, there's a possibility they could end up with Paulding County schools, and we could just end up with Cobb County schools.
Yeah.
We could end up with the Miltons and Roswells also. Yeah. So I think there's always going to be typically an 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
But you just have to deal with that.
You're trying to navigate around having 2 of them.
Well, that's true.
You want one.
That's true.
You can live with one, and you're right. There's pretty much always going to be one. You just don't want to have to deal with 2 or 3 of them.
Sure.
In a lot of senses.
Sure.
So, Art, anything else to add?
Man, no, Coop. It's tough to believe that daylight savings ends on Saturday night, right? We fall back, right? We get in, I guess, technically an extra hour of sleep. I don't really know how that works. It's that time of year, right?
Right.
And what that really means to me
Shorter
is like
days.
it's shorter days, longer nights, and high school football playoffs is what that means to me. So I'm excited. Again, we mentioned this last week, I think, in the podcast, but thank you so much to everyone who tuned in last week to the broadcast, everyone who's tuned in week in and week out to the podcast. We really appreciate you. Those folks that we see in the community, whether it's in the grocery store in Hickory Flat, this person knows exactly who I'm talking about. Or
sounds specific.
I'm telling you. Or people, just around the community at games that recognize the things that we do, and again, we hope our continued hope is that when we bring you the broadcast, the podcast, the articles, that we're doing these young men justice, because I don't. When you live in a large metro area, you probably don't get the same coverage that you probably deserve, and that's we're just trying to fill a void, and we hopefully we're doing a great job, and it's been fantastic. We enjoy the interaction, we enjoy being out there on Friday nights, and I hate that we have an end in sight, one way or the other, right? Our goal is that in late December or early December, or we're going down to Atlanta to call a game. That's our goal.
Yeah, that would be great. That's what we're here for. But obviously it takes a lot to get there.
Right.
And not saying it's not possible, because it certainly is. It just takes a while. So we're looking forward to that. Again, we'll be back here next week. As Art mentioned, it'll be a Wednesday episode again, so we'll be just a day behind. And then from there on out, we continue to cover teams throughout the playoffs. Even if we only have one team in, we do a podcast, although it's normally segmented very heavily, but we do still do a podcast, and then we do a wrap-up on the season as well, where we kind of take a look back at everything and kind of celebrate the season. And, of course, we'll start basketball coverage towards the end of November and into December, too. So we will still be around. You just change of gears a little bit. But we're not done yet, and we hope that we get to keep talking about football for the next month or so.
Absolutely. It would be a blast, Coop, man. starting into the holiday season, man. I'm looking forward to it. It's cooler nights, and I'm looking forward to a little high school football on Friday night at the Ridge.
We certainly are looking forward to it. Again, Friday night, 7 o'clock, with play-by-play coming up at 7:30. It'll be me, Art, Zach, and I hears Dave Garner may be able to join us as well.
Don't tease the folks like that, man.
Well, you'll just have to tune in and see. Then how about that?
All right.
All right, join us, folks. Stationhead app, stationhead.com. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next time. Have a great weekend.